Every day I receive emails from people or messages from people whose child has come home from school and one of their classmates has transitioned. I speak to families whose own children have been groomed by people in the education system or online.
Hey, I'm Cody, and welcome back to the Daily Declaration podcast. It's great for you all to be joining us today. Today, I have a great privilege of being joined by Kirralie Smith from the organisation Binary. Thanks for joining me, Kirralie.
Thanks for having me, Cody.
Right, it's really good to talk to you. Could you start by giving us a little bit of a background to yourself?
Sure. I'm a mother of 3 amazing teenage children that I adore, and I've homeschooled them throughout their whole life. And my husband and I run a small business on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and I refer to myself as the accidental activist. I entered this space very accidentally, just over a decade ago. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with my background, but I was very instrumental in getting the halal certification schemes investigated at a Senate inquiry level, exposing some of the rorts and bribes and different things that were going on. But that really opened me up to social media and a social media audience, and became very politically engaged and active in this space. And I don't know how much detail you want. I can share more with you if you like. But yeah,
That's great.
That's the sort of journey. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So what led you to ultimately start Binary? Because that's where you're at now as an organisation. How did that all come to pass?
Yeah, correct. So I was involved with a whole range of politicians, but I became a part of the leadership team when Cory Bernardi started the Australian Conservatives. Through the halal stuff, through Australian Conservatives and some other political endeavours that I'd had before that. I had about 30,000 followers on social media. And when we entered into the marriage campaign, the same-sex marriage campaign, I did a few videos that went viral. They had over 2 million views. And in those videos and some of the posts that I made, I warned that if we de-gender or de-sex marriage, then we're going to have to degender everything else, and children would be the primary target of that sort of indoctrination. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. I wasn't the only one who warned of that. The Marriage Alliance, ACL, Marriage Declaration, so many other people talked about those consequences. And so once the vote had been cast and lost not in our favour, I was approached by some people who said, well, we are going to have to deal with the consequences, with the fallout, and invited me to start Binary. And we've gone from there, basically. So for the last 4 years, we've been very active in this space where we're only concentrate on the one issue, unlike all the other organisations who do a great job of addressing the issue, but we are specifically focused on the gender and sex issues.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's an issue that probably, admittedly, I haven't educated myself or been as engaged on, and so I'm kind of having my eyes opened all the time about it. But I guess as Christians, we're often guilty of not being engaged in some of those really important issues. One of the questions I was wanting to get your thoughts on, it's something that comes up a fair bit in particularly evangelical Christian circles, is this idea of being distracted from the gospel. So could you explain for us a little bit why you think these sort of issues matter to Christians, and are they just distractions from the gospel?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you know too, for what it's worth. I do have a Bachelor of Theology from the Churches of Christ in New South Wales, and I've been a born-again Christian since I was 17. I'm now 50, so you can do the maths, but it's a significant time. And I believe this is core and central to the gospel. I'll say a few things. First of all, we know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and the only way to the Father is through him. And so if he's the truth, then Christians should be be and must be truth speakers. And for us to be anything else means that we're not following him, and we're not a part of his body, because he is the truth. So that's what I'd say first and foremost. Secondly, in the opening chapters of the Bible, God said he created male and female. Male and female, he created them, and they were very good. So we're made in his image. He made the distinction. Science 100% backs up the theology in that there is male and female. There's no third sex. There's no third gametes. There's no third reproductive system or anything else. This is a fundamental core issue of humanity. And if God says that humanity is male and female and it's very good, then I think that we're in very dangerous ground if we disagree with him on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess it's about being whole Bible Christians rather than just dismissing parts of the Bible that don't line up with the current cultural trends.
Correct. And I would also add to that, there are a lot of people who say, oh, we need to love, which of course we do need to love. God is love. And they will also say, that being loving is more important than being truthful. Well, I actually disagree with that. If God is love and Jesus is the truth, then truth is love. And it's not loving to allow, and we can get into this more down the track, but I've been meeting a lot with doctors, specialists, psychologists, and to allow children or anyone actually to go down the path of believing that they can change their sex is not love. It's very cruel. It's very dangerous. Nobody on earth has ever been able to change their sex. They can change appearances. They can take on superficial or stereotypical mannerisms or appearances, or become drug dependent to try and appropriate the opposite sex, but no one ever has. And what we don't hear a lot about is all of the consequences, particularly for children on puberty blockers. They're not reversible, so they end up with very stunted growth, usually sterile, and no sexual function, a whole range of really serious consequences. And we also we're often threatened with people will commit suicide if we don't let them transition. But what we don't hear about is the actual statistics after people transition and how high the suicide rate still is, because so many realise they weren't able to achieve what they wanted to do, and that was to change sex, because no one can change sex. So I would argue that as Christians, the most loving thing to do is to help people accept who they are. People clearly have mental health issues across a broad spectrum of issues. This is just another one of those issues. And we don't affirm someone who has anorexia by giving them lap band surgery. We don't affirm people who have suicidal ideation by giving them tools to kill themselves. So when someone has gender dysphoria, we don't need to give them the tools to change who they are. We need to give them the tools to accept who they are. And I would argue that's the most loving, Christ-like thing that we can do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I was watching a video by Stephen Chavura the other day, and he was responding to this claim that's often put forward, that to be respectful to someone, you need to use their preferred pronouns. And and the way he dealt with that was saying, I think he was drawing a little bit on some of Jordan Peterson's work, was to say, well, actually, if you're in a friendship with someone, lying to them is it's not actually a respectful thing to do. In fact, the opposite would be the case. So we often, I guess, conflate. Maybe we often think that love and speaking the truth are two separate things, but often they're really, to love someone truly, we need to speak the truth to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we need to be respectful, and we need to dignify the person that we're with in having that conversation. And there's two levels. In individual relationships, we absolutely need to be, to show dignity, respect, care, listen to that person's needs and come alongside them and show compassion. I don't think enabling the transition, as I said, is the loving and kind thing to do. But then we also have the ideological level, which are arguments and ideas. And I think that we can be very aggressive in deconstructing those ideas. And that's it's not the same as having that individual personal relationship with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really good. Turning to some of those ideas, we might have a look at them now. I just thought I'd get your response to a couple of, I guess, situations that, or not situations, but just ideas that are put forward um, by those. I still don't know what to call them. The woke people, or activists. So
Yeah.
maybe one of the points that is often put forward is that this is just about choice, and it's about affirming a choice that might be a harmless choice, or it might be claimed that it's a harmless choice, say for children to identify with their preferred gender. And then I guess it goes a step further to say that then it's a choice to transition to be able to fully identify with the gender of their preferred gender. How would you respond to that kind of an argument that it's really just it's a choice thing?
Yeah. Well, I disagree that it's a choice thing. We are made male or female. It's written on every single cell in our bodies. It's in our chromosomes. It's in our reproductive system. It's in the hormones that we produce. It's in the gametes that we produce. So biologically, it's impossible to change our sex. I would say that gender identity is a personality expression, and that's fine. If people, nobody has to conform to constructed stereotypes of what it is to be boy or girl, man or woman. So if you want to have short hair, short nails, long nails, whatever clothing you want to wear, however you want to speak, that's fine. There is absolutely no problem with that, especially for adults. I think adults who who want to present themselves a certain way in the world, that's fine. It's the imposition of that onto everyone else that is of great concern. For instance, males who want to say that they're female and that they should have access to all female spaces and services, including sport, change rooms, prisons, rape crisis shelters. I absolutely draw the line there. A male is a male. He will never be female, and I don't think that it doesn't help civil society to operate in a harmonious way when we cross those boundaries. For children, it's even more dangerous. Well, let's start by saying for children, play, imagination, creativity, make believe, fantasy are an essential part of being a child. So many children pretend to be dogs or cats, and we entertain that. That's fantastic, but we don't make them go to the toilet on kitty litter, or we don't make them eat out of a dog food bowl, or we don't take them to the vet when they're sick. We allow them to play, but that play enables them to work out the boundaries of what's real and what's not. And so to say to a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old that, yes, you can change sex it's not truthful, and it's actually very harmful. As I said, we've been speaking to a lot of medical professionals. There are a lot of studies coming out that these puberty blockers, that we're sold the lie that they just pause puberty and allow children time to think. It's not actually true. All children who go onto those puberty blockers will go onto cross-sex hormones, and they will have very serious consequences. I referenced some of those, such as they won't have any sexual function, they won't have any fertility, or they will become sterile. There's issues with brain development. There's also issues with bone density. So these are issues that need to be discussed, they need to be examined, and they need to be studied a lot more, because those consequences for children are incredible. Other studies show us that 80 to 90% of children who have no medical intervention, they can change their appearance, they can change their haircut and style, they can wear whatever clothes they like, even change their name. If they refrain from having those puberty blockers, once they've gone through the process of puberty, about 80 to 90% of those children will revert to their natal sex, their biological sex. So they might go through a period of feeling uncomfortable being a boy or being a girl, but 80 to 90% of them, without medicalisation, will come to accept who they are. So I think those statistics speak for themselves.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. It is really confronting what's going on. One thing I'm interested to know is, like, in your experience, who is this affecting? Like, are there particular age categories, boys or girls? What's your experience in that regard?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, very interesting question that we don't have all the statistics on, but we do know for, until recently, until the 2000s, this was mainly adult men who would call themselves transsexual, and they would appear as female. But there wasn't this level of activism either. But since the 2000s, since the rise of social media and the like, we've seen an increasing and an alarming number of teenage girls identifying as boys. And it's been called rapid onset gender dysphoria. It's a fairly well documented and studied area. And so these are teenage girls. A high number of them have autism or are on the spectrum in some way. A great deal of them also have abuse or trauma in their background. They have other mental health issues, and this just happens to be another one. But unfortunately, we're hearing that a lot of these girls present to gender clinics or to social workers and are then transitioning themselves socially, and very rapidly, even within 2 to 3 sessions, are being put on puberty blockers. So that's a really high rate. Our gender clinics, some of them have had a 4,000% increase in teenagers presenting with gender dysphoria, and there's a huge number of girls in that statistic. So it is very, very concerning.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And it seems to be I guess it's pretty obvious that what's bringing that about is this real ideological push to affirm in the way we talk, and rather than getting to the heart of the matter, which, as you mentioned, there might be things like trauma that need to be dealt with and that should be being dealt with. We're actually ignoring some of those things. Is that the way you see it?
Correct. Yes, definitely. And again, the autism links and things like that. There are treatments, there are management strategies and plans and programs that can be so much assistance to people who have these conditions. And what we're also finding is that social media, children are able to access sites and activists are able to reach out to these children and groom them in such a way that they teach them what to say, when to say it, who to say it to. And children who may have either the trauma or be ostracized or isolated in some way are being celebrated once they choose this pathway. And so if you're at a school or in a community where you don't feel very accepted, and then all of a sudden that you announce that you're transgender or non-binary or whatever it is, and suddenly you're celebrated, there's Wear It Purple days, there's Ida Hobbit days, there's all these special celebrations. It's no wonder that so many children are walking down this pathway to feel a temporary celebration, a temporary acceptance, but it's doing permanent and irreversible harm to them.
Wow. Isn't it ironic that we, like Victoria and now in Tasmania, we're going as a society to great lengths to try and avoid people who might be experiencing gender dysphoria or other kinds of difficulties, to make sure that they don't feel pressure in any way to let, I guess, in the case of gender, let their natural gender just play out. And as you said, most people end up overcoming that as they grow. We're going to such lengths to stop that natural process from taking place, and yet we can pressure kids as much as we want from the other side. Like, as you say, trying to put thoughts in their mind, tell them how to approach and talk to different people about changing their gender. It seems to be a bit of a double standard.
Oh, it's insane. Like when I think of, I grew up in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and it was all about girl power and feminism, and girls can do anything, and we have equal value to males. Now, I'm not a rad femme. I'm not a feminist. I wouldn't even describe myself as that, but I do believe that we have equal value and worth, different roles and different expressions of those roles, to the point now where girls who feel like they don't fit or conform to the stereotype are saying, well, they must be boys, and that there's activists who are so ready to pounce on that is actually heartbreaking. So many of my peers and older women are saying, they would have been transitioned because we used to just say they're tomboys, and that girls who didn't like to wear a dress but wore shorts and climbed trees, they're just tomboys. Yet now we hear story after story after story of girls who don't conform to the stereotype thinking that they are transgender, or boys who feel feminine or want to express themselves, in that more feminine style, that they must be female. And it's absolutely and utterly ridiculous that we're being dragged back to this rigid stereotype when we've done so much work to break those boundaries and to allow people to express themselves however they like. And I think on the whole, Christians and non-Christians are pretty accepting and are quite okay with people expressing themselves, whether it's with makeup, clothing, names, whatever it is. But to then have that medical intervention and to say that that's the only pathway and that you'll be penalised if you don't go down that pathway is absolutely horrendous. And you mentioned Victoria and Tasmania, where Victoria has dreadful laws in place and Tasmania are now wanting to put them in place, that even parents would be prosecuted, penalised for having a conversation with their own child to encourage them to embrace their biological sex. And it's staggering. I'm exposed to this all day, every day, and I still can't believe what we're facing in these states and what the activists want to see happen.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I haven't looked into the proposed Tasmanian laws all that much. What are actually the main differences? I've heard that Tasmania is pursuing even more radical policies than Victoria has.
Yeah, look, I'm halfway through the 332-page document and it's hard going, but there is this real sense of really strong penalties for parents, priests, pastors, anyone who does not go down the affirmation only line, which is such a bizarre term, isn't it? Affirmation only, it's actually us who want to affirm the child and say that you're a boy and that's a good thing, but they've twisted the language. So yes, I don't know off the top of my head what those penalties are, but they're talking about very strong penalties that even to have the conversation with your child will be penalised. I've found it fascinating so far that they really don't have any strong, hard examples of conversion therapy actually going on in terms of what most of us would imagine in terms of electric shock therapy or physical interventions. Those things don't happen, and nobody wants those things to happen. What we're talking about is counselling, pastoral care, and conversations that they're trying to outlaw. So it's quite alarming. The majority of people in Australia, in Victoria, in Tasmania are very unaware of these laws and the consequences of those laws. So we have a really big job ahead of us in raising that awareness and making sure that parents in particular have the right, and because they have the responsibility to raise their children and to be able to discuss these issues openly and honestly, because nobody is going to love their children more than their family. And the state certainly will not love the children more than the family will.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned kind of public awareness of the issue, and I want to get to that in a second. But before I do, you mentioned also like women's sports and some of the implications and effects that this ideology are having on women. Do you have any sense of how, like, say, female athletes and that are responding with this? I imagine it'd be pretty confusing and confronting and at times pretty heartbreaking, some of the things that are going on within female sports.
It is. It's really difficult, really tragic, and it's very complicated because whether it's at the community level or the elite level, you have the complexity of relationship that goes alongside these things. So, for instance, I've just met with a couple of times now and posted an interview with Deborah Ackerson. She was formerly known as Deborah Lovely. She is one of our longest and most successful Commonwealth Games champions. She competed in 5 consecutive Commonwealth Games, 2 Olympics. She's won countless medals. And she was forced at her last Commonwealth Games to compete against Laurel Hubbard, who was formerly known as Gavin Hubbard. He is male. And in weightlifting, which is a strength sport, physicality matters. Biology really matters. And he was injured in that that competition, so didn't go all the way through. But for someone like Deborah, who had achieved more than just about any other athlete, let alone female athlete in this country, the only question she was repeatedly asked by the media was, how does she feel to compete against a transgender athlete? And that just staggers me. So first of all, achievements are being diminished, demeaned, and taken away from our elite female athletes. She was groomed of what she could and couldn't say in the media, and the threat hangs over the heads of our female athletes that if they speak out, they could be penalised. And we saw that in the federal election with the swimmers. And when FINA made the decision, the international swimming body, that transgender athletes could not participate at the elite level, some of our swimmers spoke out, including Dawn Fraser, who's an Olympic legend, but some of our current swimmers. And there was a massive backlash and uproar. And I just find that so disheartening. So someone like Deborah Lovely, the weightlifter, has said that she now knows she needs to speak out on behalf of the current female athletes and anyone coming through, because these women feel so ostracized and isolated and intimidated if they dare to speak out about these things. We also know that in America, where Leah Thomas has been swimming and has smashed all the collegiate records, he has not had any surgery. He still has all his full male genitalia. He demands access to the female change rooms. And those girls have been told that if they object, they'll be off the team. Now, this is just one example, Cody, but I have so many examples from so many female athletes, community sports groups, parents, and girls themselves who are so concerned about this, because in competition, they may have grown up with the boys, they may have grown up with the people who are trying to now take or, encroach on their space. And so there are all these complexities. Nobody wants to be called a transphobe or a bigot. I don't mind anymore because I just think they're ridiculous terms. But I understand that the majority of people in the community, if you go down to your local soccer club, you want to get on with everyone there. You've got to do the kiosk duty together. You turn up to training 2 nights a week or whatever it is. And so it's really become this intimidation, threatening, bullying environment. But what's happening is the girls are the ones who are suffering because they're not allowed to speak out.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's horrible. And within the broader community, do you have a sense of how, so I read an article that you published recently about some surveys that you'd done, talking to people within key electorates in Victoria. I guess you'd get a fair bit of exposure to people just across the country as well. Like, what's been your sense of how people deal with this, and also what's the level of awareness?
Yeah, so awareness on some issues, such as the sporting issue, is increasing, and approximately half of the population, probably a bit more now since the federal election, and it was such a hot potato issue. But when it comes to, children in schools being targeted with gender ideology, 50% or less of people are aware that that's actually happening. I have a series of books that I show people that are on the Scholastic website and booklets that go out. These are books that are in children's libraries and are being read to children. And when I show people these books, they don't believe me that they're actually being read in schools. One in particular talks about doctors and parents can only make a guess at what their child is, and that they could be agender, transgender, new choice, third spirit. I mean, words that most of us don't even know. And these are aimed at 3 to 5 year olds. And then when it comes to the parental rights issue, probably only 20 to 30% of Australians are aware that there is even this issue of what's going on. And so the awareness is very low. However, when we show people the resources, when we explain what the laws mean, when we show them the evidence from the education department and all the rest of it, the opposition to those things is up around 80 or 90%. That most people do not want this ideology in their schools, in their sports rooms, anywhere. So there is a massive gap at the moment, and that's the big challenge. That's the space that Binary is operating in, and we are raising awareness of these issues, but we're also giving parents and citizens the opportunity to express their opposition and to actively participate in political lobbying and activities where we can make sure that we draw a line in the sand so that we can protect our children and particularly protect vulnerable women.
Wow. Yeah. So do you find that when you talk to people about, you mentioned that some people kind of don't believe that this is what's actually going on. How hard is it to actually convince people because culture's like it's changed a lot in the past decade maybe, and a lot of us, particularly people who haven't been keeping up with all the crazy things that have been happening, it'd be a bit of a culture shock in some ways. Do you find people are resistant to that, or you can slowly win them over and help them to realize that this is actually what's going on?
Yes to all of that.
Yeah.
So you have people who are so opposed and will never believe anything you say, even if you put the book in their hands or show them the piece of legislation or highlight the part of the Victorian Department of Education that says school staff can transition children without parental knowledge or consent. However, most reasonable Australians, once you give them that evidence, it might take a little bit of time for them to react. Unfortunately, the people who are most receptive are the ones who it's already starting to impact their families. And so I'm every day, I receive emails from people or messages from people whose child has come home from school and one of their classmates has transitioned. I speak to families whose own children have been groomed by people in the education system or online. Speaking to a coach for AFL whose 17-year-old, one of her 17-year-old players went up against a 140 kilo, I think he was, transgender athlete. Now, I don't do AFL. I'm pretty sure you do because I know your family is into it, but did a specky up the girl's back and which I think is just running up the back. Is that right?
Jumping on their shoulders.
And she just collapsed underneath him. So
Wow.
on their shoulders. Well, there you go. So 140 kilo on a 17-year-old girl. I don't think you're going to have many 140 kilo, 6 foot, 17-year-old girls playing AFL or any other sport, to be quite honest. So, and I'm hearing from these people once this is already happening and they are really feeling quite desperate, quite upset, quite alarmed at what's happening and asking what they can do. So it's the whole gamut. But I think that the largest percentage would be those people that once they're made aware, once they see the evidence, they're very responsive. And I feel very encouraged that we will be able to impact the Victorian state election come November. And we are working very closely with concerned groups in Tasmania at the moment. I'm actually headed there next week to have some meetings with people down there because this issue is gaining more traction. And we really need to put a halt to it sooner rather than later, particularly for the sake of the children who will be suffering irreversible harm because of it.
No, absolutely. It is encouraging, as you say, that even 80 to 90% potentially of people, once they're made aware of it, they're really opposed to it. So that is encouraging. Just to pick up on something you mentioned earlier about parents encountering really difficult situations when kids are coming back, wanting to transition, things like that, or identifying at least as the opposite gender. Do you have any advice to parents? I'm sure you engage with them a fair bit when they encounter a situation like that.
Yes, look, I think it's so important. Relationship to me is the most important thing. And I will always encourage parents and families to make sure that they keep those lines of communication open, that they listen to and hear the needs and desires of the child. It's very important to try and get some professional help and from people who aren't going to go immediately down that affirmation pathway. Unfortunately, on social media, children and teenagers can get access to the names of gender clinics and people who will be sympathetic to them. But I do advise parents to try and seek the advice of, there's only a few, but the few medical professionals who will address all of the issues, not just the gender confusion. The other thing I say to parents is to be really to have a good relationship with the school and the principal where their children are going, if that's what they do, and to make sure that they don't feel afraid to make their opinion known. A lot of school principals, a lot of school staff are not aware what parents think, and they're not going to be aware unless parents speak to them. So they need to be expressing that. I know of groups of some groups in the community that when there is a Wear It Purple Day or whatever it is, that they will contact their local MP, they will withdraw their child from the school for that day, and they will let the school know. So we say to parents, make sure you keep a written email trail of all the correspondence that you have with the school. If you feel that you're vulnerable or maybe ostracised, or your child may be ostracised as a result of speaking out, then contact us, because we can do that on your behalf. But, there's always, it's like anything, there's strength in numbers. So talk to other parents, go together and talk to your school about these things. So there's quite a few different strategies. We do have what we call the anti-PC, P&C pack that has some very basic entry-level suggestions of what you can do. And then we're more than happy to talk with parents or concerned citizens about these issues and how to walk along it. But at the moment, it's really tragic, a lot of the stories that we're hearing, because there's so few healthcare professionals willing to put their jobs, their reputations on the line. I'll just share this story with you. I can't go into too much detail, but it's a story of a 14-year-old child who had expressed to their parents that they wanted to identify as the opposite sex, and the parents were, look, we need to talk about it, not really keen for that to happen. There was no big fight, no blow up, no, fireworks in it all. And the next thing they knew, the police were at the door. The 14-year-old had their bags packed and were taken away by the police. That family have now not seen their child for 16 months. And what it appears to have happened is that child was groomed online about, this is what you say, this is how you do it, threatened to commit suicide. The police will be there and you won't have to be with your parents anymore. So we don't even know the level or the degree that the gender confusion had taken root, but, a lot of teenagers would think it would be fabulous to leave their parents' house and their rule. But these are the sort of things that are happening. And because it's still such a murky area, these legal processes are taking far too long. This child will be 16 by the time it goes to court, and so they're already lost in that sense. So now that's scary, and that's things, again, that people don't want to hear. They don't want to believe these things are happening, but they are. So you have to be very engaged with your children, know what they're looking at on social media, know the kind of people they're hanging out with, get open with the school and those levels of communication. And if this sort of is raising an alarm for you, then contact us and we'll try and put you in touch with some healthcare professionals who can help you.
No, that's really helpful, actually. It's so hard hearing what's happening. It's really, really confronting. Like for me, like I said, I'm not overly familiar with this as an area. Very unfamiliar with what's going on. So it's been really helpful you outlining some of that. Turning from parents to the church, like I've kind of mentioned on a couple of occasions, this is not something that Christians, or I've alluded to it at least, it's not something that Christians talk about very much. In fact, we seem a little uncomfortable, and I know in my experience, it's definitely been the case. I'm quite uncomfortable dealing with some of these things, and sometimes it's easier to just live in denial. But do you have any advice to the church as a whole in how we can lovingly deal with this issue, but also with clarity and, as we mentioned before, standing up in a truthful way?
Yeah, well, I mean, information, education is always really important, and we need to understand the issues before we can be very effective in the space. I don't think it's too hard for Christians to be able to do that. As I laid out earlier, God's very clear throughout the entire Bible that there's male and there's female, and his intention for marriage, his intention for family, his intention for husbands and wives, it's consistent throughout the Old and the New Testaments. And I don't think Jesus did away with any of those things. And being truth speakers and lovers of people means that, we want to protect them from institutional abuse. We want to protect them from lies, basically. And it is a lie to think that a person can change their sex, because it's never happened and it never will happen. So I think if we stand on that, we're standing on really solid ground, because it can't be debated or ignored. When it comes to personal relationships within the church, again, I'll reinforce, we need to be very respectful, to dignify the other person, because no matter what it is, whether it's sin, whether it's a cultural issue that we're not comfortable with, we need to express patience, peace, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, all the fruit of the Spirit in those things, self-control. So we need to do as we would with any other issue, and make sure that we're being consistent in those things. I would encourage church leaders to speak about these things with confidence and with grace from the pulpit, to make sure that our arms are open to anyone, whatever their circumstance, in any situation, and then be wise, obviously, how we go about, leadership and all the rest of it, because we do have boundaries that are biblical boundaries that must be observed. And I don't think it's any different in this situation to what it is for any other issue that the church might face when it comes to racism or adultery or thieves and liars or people from different cultures, whatever it is. I just think we need to be consistent in our beliefs and in our presentation of those beliefs.
Yeah, totally agree. You mentioned education. I'm not sure if you're much of a podcast listener, but do you have any, say, podcasts or even books that you would recommend maybe everyday Christians or pastors engage with to help them understand these issues?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Frank Turek, he's an American apologist, and he's got some great podcasts on this issue. Might be a little bit fiery or charismatic for some people, but I've found he's very helpful. There's a number of books. One was put together by an Australian, I think he's a lawyer, Patrick Parkinson, on transgender, Shades of Grey. That's a really good book. There's a lot of contributions from people that I think people familiar with the Canberra Declaration would recognise. Ryan T. Anderson wrote When Harry Became Sally. That's a very helpful book as well. So Wendy Francis has put some beautiful children's books out. She's from the ACL in Queensland. There are some of those resources. Again, I do have a list of them, so if people want to contact me and get some of those lists, more than happy to do that. There's also some great support groups online of parents who have been or are going through these issues, and I can connect people to some of those as well that are really helpful.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you. One last thing before we finish would be, how can people practically help? I guess you mentioned a couple of ways throughout the course of the podcast, but how can people kind of engage at a practical level, whether it be through advocacy or financially, even engaging with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so as we are constantly running campaigns for awareness and education, and like I said, we're the only organisation that I'm aware of in Australia that's just solely concentrating on this particular issue. So we will be actively engaged in the Victorian and Tasmanian campaigns. So if you live in those states and you want to volunteer, send me a message, and we'll get you connected to other volunteers who are going to help in those spaces. Next year in New South Wales is the state election, and all around the country there's different issue-based campaigns that people can be involved in. So social media is primarily, we can reach up to 1.3 million people a week on social media, which is fantastic. So sharing information and petitions and things like that is always very helpful. We ask people to join the mailing list, because I'm sure it's only a matter of time until we're banned from some of those social media platforms. raising money for awareness, because producing the resources and getting the information out as far and wide as we can is very important. So people who can assist financially, it's greatly appreciated. And these days, a little bit goes a long way, especially in the digital space, because it doesn't cost as much to produce as what it used to when we had to produce everything in hard copies. We also need to be getting in front of politicians. So I really encourage people to speak to their local MP and to talk to the ministers in their state. For instance, a really helpful thing that people can do is, whether it's the Minister for Sport or the Minister for Women, to be able to just ask simple questions. Ask them to define the term woman. Ask them, what are their boundaries? What do they think the lines are? And express what yours are to them. Because if politicians don't hear from you, they really do live in a bubble, and they really think that all that's going on is whoever the loudest voice is in their ear. So we need to take our citizenship very seriously and responsibly, and get involved in communicating with those politicians. We provide opportunities for people to, we might have templates that they can use to speak to their politicians. We can do direct calls to politicians on certain issues. So there's lots of different ways. So if you sign up as a volunteer, or you get involved and share our material, then that's a great way of making sure that more people are informed and more people are equipped to deal with this.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's great. And we'll include a link to your website in, I think it's binary.org.au. For anyone who's watching or listening to this, we'll include a link to that in the description. No, it's definitely some really, really good practical ways that we can be involved. And I know it's confronting for a lot of people, and it can be challenging to just get off our backsides and do something. But when we realize what's going on, as Kirralie, you've outlined really well over the past 45 minutes, I think that should be enough incentive to get us out there and doing something. So I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks, Cody.